with the reports and work that the OECD has been looking into. So Nelson will begin, and that will be from a philanthropic perspective. And then Noémie Ledon, who leads the social and emotional skills survey here at the OECD, will look into why we need to change how we assess. So Nelson, over to you.
Thank you very much, Batil. Can everybody hear me okay, and you can see my slides? Just a nod somewhere. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm going to do a very quick walkthrough of our recent report. I'm not going to do the whole homework for you. You're going to have to actually read it if you are interested in some of the tidbits. But I want to basically just take out kind of maybe what I believe are the three most important things that you need to keep from this report. And these are the following. The first one is, I think there's a pretty established idea of why these skills are important, but there's also a timely reason why they're important now that I want to draw attention. Then I'm going to walk you through a couple of the results from our survey so that you can understand a little bit about how some of these philanthropic foundations that we managed to survey actually are extending the scope of where these interventions are actually happening. They're trying to measure skills in places that are not particularly easy or skills that are actually tough to measure, not in the usual suspects. And also, more importantly, exactly what can the philanthropic sector bring to the sector? Like, is there something specific that these organizations from this lens can actually contribute? So the first part is kind of a very important timing issue. So there's a very kind of embedded pattern in modern labor markets where the skills that are demanded in the market are actually changing substantively, and they're being rewarded also in different ways. So technological change is actually reducing the demand for certain types of skills and increasing the demand for other skills. So this is a long story. Like, these changes in skill composition in the labor market are actually explaining a very substantive part of the wage gap that has been created between high-skilled workers and low-skilled workers. But there's an actual aspect here that is not so well known, which is that when you actually account for other sets of skills, apart from the commonly known cognitive skills, you add social skills to this mix, the gap actually widens even further. So, for instance, David Deming actually found that the increase in the real wages within the United States of workers that have high math skills and high social skills has increased around 26% over the past 30, 40 odd years. In the meantime, the wage growth of workers with actual high skills and can you hear me?
We can see you, and now the display mode is perfect. Thank you, Nathan.
Okay. And so basically the issue is that once you account for these changes in skills, we're actually increasing the wage gap. So the reason why this is important now is that if we basically ignore the fact that if there are particular social skills that are being concentrated among high-skilled workers that also hone important social skills, and important math skills, then the concentrations in the labor market are going to widen and become worse. So if you're interested in inequality of skills or interested in kind of the general distribution of basically rewards in the labor market, then you need to pay attention to this. Next. The other reason why we're very fortunate to actually put this together now in 2023 is because very recently we had a big update of kind of the literature of what can be expected from social and emotional learning interventions. So maybe a little bit over a decade ago, there was a very large study that showed a lot of promise, like significant sizes of some interventions. Some skill sets are actually improved regularly, some across all students. But then this update this year actually took like a big it kind of watered down a little bit the results, and it showed that the best that you can expect from these interventions are relatively small effects, and also relatively small in very specific groups of skills, not across all types of skills. So for instance, you can see there, even if you try to improve some specific social and emotional skills, the best sometimes that you can do is have average effects of around 0.2 as a HSD. So the effects are not that big. Actually, they're even around kind of half of where they were about a decade ago when they were measured first. There are also lots of effects that are very different across the distribution of students. So there are effects that sometimes actually accrue over students at the low tier of some distributions or with gaps in some other skills. So the important point here is that what can be expected from this is actually pretty moderate. Like, don't expect any miracles. Actually, miracles tend to be something that should kind of flag you a warning alert that something is amiss, which leads me to my next point. Next, please. And these are basically the three things that we found are basically what might be kind of keeping the sector a little bit from not improving as much as you want. The first one is hype. There are some interventions that are very interesting, very intuitive, very emotionally appealing, that actually end up receiving a lot of attention, but actually don't pan out when you actually try to see whether the results are coming in. Can you click on the slide twice, please? So the first is an example called growth mindset. So just to give an example, for those of you who do not know what this is the idea that a lot of the things that you think that are fixed about yourself are actually malleable, and changing that idea changes your disposition to improve in many different ways. So this idea has taken hold in a lot of different parts of the education sector. I recently even heard that sometimes the first homework that a kid in preschool actually needs to do is to somehow depict or draw this the idea of growth mindset. So it's taken hold. But after 20 odd years and a lot of meta study wars, there's been already a conclusion that there's no great things to be expected about these types of growth mindset interventions, that they were a little bit exaggerated, that they took hold of the whole sector, and they probably should have received as much attention now looking in hindsight. So I think the lesson from this is that instead of kind of going over a 20 odd year curve of high expectations and then low realizations, it's better to have good science from the beginning, to make sure that actually the type of things that you're measuring, or that Brent also showed us, are sometimes quite hard to measure, that they actually pan out. The second one is something that even in our survey we try to fight against, which is that there's still a very large overrepresentation of certain type of skills and concerns of students that come from what's called the weird bias. So there's a big tendency, especially what we've seen in this space, of certain peculiarities of psychology to be overrepresented in the types of concerns that these programs try to improve. So for those Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic populations have different salient psychological features. Like here I'm thinking about people tend to be more self-focused, more individualistic, more non-conformant, more patient as well, more trustworthy towards strangers, more analytic as well, more focused about the intention of others. And this also explains a little bit about why a lot of these things that you see in social and emotional learning are related to self-esteem or related to self-efficacy. And probably these are not really the concerns of a lot of populations in different places that are not weird. So it's important to make sure that whatever you're trying to learn from an intervention that is happening in a weird scenario is actually transportable to a place where it isn't, or where this particular skill is not so socially valuable, or people actually don't have those concerns. And the third one is implementation. So we already know, we've known for a long time, that you might know exactly what kind of curriculum or what kind of intervention you want to do, but actually getting it done, actually making sure that the teachers can convey these messages, actually making sure that the school environment is proper for these to actually improve, is really, really hard to get. And there's a lot to be said about implementation challenges. And I'm going to show you an example a little bit later. So next. The first thing that you should know about this is we basically try to survey the types of interventions that are backed by philanthropic foundations, that they tackle a host or a single social and emotional skill, very broadly defined, and that the outcomes are actually related to education. So we managed to survey a lot of programs. These programs have a presence in 53 countries. And one thing that we found is a couple of unusual things. First is that there are a couple of what we are calling maybe cell hubs that are not in the usual suspect places. They're not in the UK, in Australia, or in the US. One of them is in Colombia. The other one is in Tanzania. Another one is in Brazil. So there's a lot of interest, kind of grassroots interest to understand this issue and to make interventions and measure them better in these countries. And we also see that there are plans for expansion for many of the programs that are already ongoing, particularly a couple of international programs. We try to do kind of a very deep X-ray of what exactly these programs are about. What do they do? What do they try to accomplish? How do they work? What theories are they based on? What kind of skills do they tackle? There's a more to be said on that, but that is on the report, so I'm not going to show it here. So please, next. But there are a couple of important things for you to know about this survey. The first is that a lot of these programs actually tackle multiple skills at the same time. They do this because this is an easier way for them to actually group skills, because they do it already explicitly. They have very dedicated programs that tackle a particular set of skills or a particular group of skills. But the important thing here is that there is almost like no such thing as a single program that is trying to tackle or improve a single skill. There's this sense of relationship between the different skills that are tackled simultaneously. Next. And here is when we run with one of, again, another probably like warning alert. We asked all of these programs, how are you actually assessing? Like, are you running into all of the problems that Brent already kind of showed us? Are you confusing skills with traits? Are you probably measure things in ways that are self-reported and not so reliable? And we found a little bit of that. We found that there are the landscape of all of these organizations are really trying their best to figure out how to measure this, how to assess it. But Brenton, you explained really well how this is super difficult. This is not something easy for them to do. And we didn't find a single group of 2 foundations who are actually using the same framework to measure their like whatever they're actually trying to improve on social and emotional skills. So this is a little bit of a, so today, 10th of October, we're putting like a warning sign in case like 2 years or 3 years from now, it pans out that there's a particular evaluation that comes out that shows something great or a new finding. Like we have to keep a little bit of a critical eye to see whether they really are well done, they're reliable, they're credible, they have a proper pre-registration, they don't go for some of the problems that sometimes go in this literature. And I think it's quite important to note that this is basically the self-manifested kind of guide of what are the problems and the needs for these programs. Next. And this is where it is. So when I mention implementation challenges, all of the programs that are trying to improve these skills are actually running most of the time into the same 2 problems. They're finding a rigid education policy. Basically, they don't find space to include whatever they're working on. But at the same time, they find that the available assessment methods are just not there, or they don't understand them, or they're too expensive, or they don't know how to get them, or they don't know how to use them. So the need is just there, it's manifest. We need to solve that problem. So how actually are we going to solve the problem? Just to also follow Brent's good advice and show actually a solution apart from all of the problems that we're seeing here. Next. Basically, what and here I'm summarizing a little bit the recommendations from this report, is that a couple of things actually need to happen to overcome these challenges. The first one is that when there's actually good evidence for something, it needs to be brought up to the educational authorities. They need to be able to pay attention. But it has to come from like really reliable evidence. The reliability of the evidence, sometimes it's suspect. Like it doesn't sometimes come from the best studies, the most powered studies, the the most reliable studies. So that needs to improve. The cultural scope of CEL is actually improving a lot. There are new skills trying at least to be experimentally measured in different places. There are new hubs that probably we were not particularly aware of, like Colombia or Tanzania, where a lot of new programs are actually happening. And we also need to kind of up the rigor of the types of studies that we do to analyze the effectiveness and focus beyond average effects. Ultimately, I think there's a very big need to have more of a multidisciplinary agenda. This is not something that is the whole realm of psychology or economics or sociology or education researchers. I think like everybody has a lot to add, and I've seen very great examples of these great collaborations, particularly in academia, that actually solve together all of the minds trying to figure out how this works. So we think that this is a very promising avenue, and we think that foundations actually have a lot to say about these 5 points. So I'm actually gonna stop with that. Just give you a place where you can actually, next slide, please. So the report is actually available now. You can read it. We hope to receive comments from you and questions at some other point, because now I am very interested to hear what the foundations and what Noemi actually has to say, because the work of the OECD right now is actually tilting precisely towards solving these problems that Brent and I have highlighted. So Noemi, over to you.
Thank you, Nelson, and I would like to thank you for the invitation first, and also congratulate you on the great reports. I had the pleasure to review it and to collaborate a little bit with you on this, and I must say that I was impressed by the quality of the report and the methodology and the findings you reported in there. So congrats. Thank you for the invitation. Let me, yes, I hope you can see it well now. Yes, great. My name is Noémie Ledonné. I'm responsible for 2 projects at the OECD on social and emotional skills. One is the OECD survey on social and emotional skills that was already mentioned. And the other one is the R&D track of the survey, which is called Rethinking Assessment of Social and Emotional Skills. And I'm presenting here today on behalf of the team. I'm working with a wonderful team of colleagues, Adriano Linzarini, Daniel Catarino, and I know that Katharina Grace-Wright is online, and she contributed to some of the findings that I will show today. So as part of the R&D project we launched at the beginning of this year, we are revisiting the conceptual foundations that were established for the OECD survey on social and emotional skills. And we are also reviewing our approach for measuring social and emotional skills. And you could hear from the previous presentations that this work is warranted. So what we did was to find a way to identify the skills we should prioritize for assessments. And the way we did that was to review latest evidence on the importance of those skills for key life outcomes, and also the extent to which those skills are teachable. We want to really make the case that these skills can be taught in school through deliberate school intervention. And I think the work that Nelson and his team did, thanks to the support of the foundations and reviewing the impact of your interventions, was fantastic and really helped. But we expanded, you know, the reach to interventions that were not necessarily supported by your foundations. So here you can see a table where we listed all the skills that met those 2 criteria. So that those skills are important for key life outcomes. You can see them listed on the left-hand side of the table, and they can be taught. And just to give an example, interestingly, self-control was found to be, you know, highly teachable, but also important for a wide range of outcomes, especially academic performance, but also prevention from antisocial behavior like crime, violence, and so on. While, for instance, a skill like empathy was also found to be highly teachable, but particularly important for an outcome such as political participation, so civic engagements in general. And so this is very interesting because this could also help with the design of interventions. What skills do you want to tackle and for what? To improve what outcomes in the end. So those are the skills we now want to focus on for future assessments. So what have we used so far? This was mentioned several times as part of the survey on social emotional skills. We used what we call indirect assessments. So those are self-reports typically. And these are very interesting measures. They have been used extensively in the field, not only by us, but by many small scale studies, and they are very cost efficient. They require students to reflect on their own skills or their own behavior. So that's why we call them indirect assessments. What we would like to move next, is we would like to design direct assessment of social emotional skills, because we think that it would be much more neat and elegant to be able to, capture students when they demonstrate a skill, when they use a skill because the situation they are in calls for it. So we would like to develop those new direct assessments to complement, not replace self-report questionnaires. And we think that combining methods will actually lead to more precise measures, because we will reduce the risk of having systematic biases, because we won't be using one method. And then we would also bring multiple perspectives on those skills. And so we will have a better understanding of those skills. So what we have done so far is a comprehensive review of direct assessments. And we first did a search to identify existing direct assessments. So we look into what exists in terms of behavioral assessments. I'll get back to that, and also mixed batteries. I'll get back to that to tell you that this is actually where we want to focus on. But we also reviewed the potential of biophysiological markers and the potential of leveraging artificial intelligence technologies and other tools to be able to infer social emotional skills in students or adults and so on. The reason why we finally decided to discard the last two categories is because we think that they raise, for now, important ethical concerns. Collecting health data is a bit sensitive. And then for AI, we think that comparability across different cultures cannot be reached yet, because the field is too young and not yet developed enough. So for those reasons, we decided to focus on the other two categories. And here we have conducted a more thorough review, and we have identified nearly 70 tools that we started to review extensively. And we are looking at different criteria when we do this critical review. We want those tools ideally to be as clear as possible about the skills that they target. So we are looking at the clarity of the skill definition. We are looking at the number of skills tested, because ideally, again, we would like to have as many skills as possible in a limited amount of time. We are looking at whether the tasks are designed, in a way that is very authentic for students and that is very engaging. We are also looking at the age that the task and games targets. And ideally, we want for these tools to be administered to school-age students. And then we're also looking into the feasibility of those tools and assessments in terms of implementation. We are also reviewing, all the measures pertaining to their reliability, validity, predictive value, to make sure we have good psychometric properties for the derived measures. And of course, because we are working with so many countries, OECD, but also non-OECD member countries, we want this tool to be as universal, as relevant universally as possible, and adaptable to different cultures. So we are trying to, find inspiration among what exists, and this is why we have used those criteria to review all these tools. So just to give you a flavor of what are the most promising tools we identified. So on that slide, I'll show you a couple of examples in terms of task-based assessments. So the example on the left-hand side is a story task for assessing optimism in students. So the students are presented with this little drawing and this text that says that Zarpies keep doubles as pets, and doubles are green, furry, and fun to play with. But then students are told that those doubles run away sometimes, and sometimes they don't come back. And then they are given the task of this question. Now imagine that you yourself are a Zarpie and your double ran away. Do you think your double will or will not come back? So this really asks a question to measure optimism of students toward themselves. And then you have a second question on if that situation applies to another person, then what are the chances that the double will come back or will not come back? And apparently, so in the findings of related to the data collected through that task found that usually optimism levels of students are higher for themselves than for others. And so these are very interesting ways to measure optimism through that task. Another interesting task is this one about theory of mind, which is on the right-hand side, where this is a screenshot, but this is an animated video when you have triangles moving around and the student is being asked, what are the triangles doing? And so this question is designed to capture students' capacity to project, intentions in others, to be able to understand the behavior of others. So those are two examples. But we are also very much interested in using game-based assessment because we think that in comparison to task-based assessment, they have an advantageous format. They are more immersive and attractive. As you can see on the next slide, where you have screenshots of inspiring games with fonts. Usually those games require students to create an avatar. So to personalize, the game, and so to be more engaged because then they can project themselves into this character. And so we are getting closer to a real situation and identification with the character that is being designed. And so this is an interesting setting for the game-based assessment. And usually they also use more complex scenarios, so which are also closer to reality and real settings. And they also allow us for testing a different set of skills and not only one skill, which is the case for task-based assessment. They usually focus only on a smaller set of skills or even one skill. So those are game developers and owners that we have identified and that we will be contacting soon to explore potential for collaborations on those, to design together a game-based assessment. So this is what we want to produce. We want to produce a game-based assessment that can target multiple skills at one time. And those skills need to be teachable and predictive of life outcomes. We really want to capture actual, real social emotional skills, not personality traits, not cognitive skills in situations that are as authentic as possible. For this, we need to design various tasks to be able to measure multiple skills. And we absolutely want to adapt this to different cultural contexts. So in terms of the timeline we have for this, we are completing a full year of this research, looking at latest evidence on social emotional skills in general. And we'll move to an important phase soon, which is prototyping. And for this, we need to identify that partner. And we also need support for this seed work. I've worked with many of you on that meeting, and many of you provided support, to the participation of different sites in the OECD survey on social emotional skills. But here, we really need some support for this centralized part of the work. That we will later share among all the participating sites that might be interested in joining this project in the longer term. And we need to join forces for this to have a very nice prototype for this assessment. And then we'll pilot it. Here again, I'm sure we'll find excellent partners to pilot it. There are so many people, interested in piloting such a game assessment. So I'm not too worried about that phase. And then we'll refine the assessment. And then hopefully at some point in 2029, 2030, we'll go global and implement it. So that's the plan. And yeah, if you're interested in supporting this important seed work, please contact us. And you can also check our webpage. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Noémie. Sorry, I butchered your last name.
No, that's fine.
As a French person, that's not very good form. Thank you very much to the both of you. I mean, so many questions raised on the basis of this work. So I think it's a perfect time to turn to our distinguished panel. So on the basis of that unpacking of social and emotional skills and how to measure them, we're going to hear from practitioners on, how they've been pushing the envelope and testing these solutions. So I am very privileged to be here with Erin Ganju, who is director at Echidna Giving, a very good friend of NetForward that we're delighted to welcome. Emma van der Meulen was Global Program Manager at the Porticus Foundation, also one of our distinguished members. Fabio Segura, who is co-CEO of the Jacobs Foundation, formerly co-chair of this education working group and beloved member. And Bo Stern-Thompson, who is Vice President and Chair of Learning Through Play at the Lego Foundation and another important partner of our work here at the OECD. So I'm going to start with you, Erin, with the first question. So Echidna Giving is supporting two major programs focused on building life skills for students. The Life Skill Collaborative in India and the Alive Assessment of Life Skills and Values in East Africa, in Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda. So both of these programs focused on developing better assessment tools, including student assessment, teacher assessment, and system-wise assessment, each in the context of a specific region, a specific culture. So, can you tell us more about those and what prompted you to actually pick India, Kenya, Tanzania, and Uganda for this work?
Great. Thank you, Bathiel, and thank you and congratulations, Nelson, and to the whole team on the wonderful report. We're really excited about it and glad to be part of this movement that we're all a part of and really highlighting and spotlighting the great work being done in this area. So I think the story for Echidna Giving, really focus on the fact that as Echidna Giving, first of all, we're supporting the gender equality in and through education. So for many years now, well over a decade, we've been, focused on the fact that completing secondary education is a game changer for youth, particularly girls. And the evidence obviously shows that, through extending education, it can help have smaller, wealthier, and healthier families and pass on that value of education to the next generation. But in many ways, we haven't really been achieving kind of that promise. And a lot of that is in the fact that we feel like education sometimes is too narrowly defined. And so really embracing and understanding that life skills and social emotional skills and programs can be really important for youth and particularly girls to staying in school and learning while there, and also to really reshaping gender norms that can enable girls to have greater agency in their life choices, is critical to think about. And understanding how to embed this and ensure this is part of our education systems has been really important. For many youth facing great adversity in many of the global South countries that Echidna Giving is supporting education work in, we're seeing that supporting social emotional skills is arguably just as important as academic outcomes and their ability to thrive in school and beyond. So that was sort of the anchor for a lot of this work. And for many years, Echidna Giving's been funding implementation, research, and advocacy efforts around these important skills and why they matter for youth and particularly girls, and defining how to measure them. And we're really been focused on trying to build, as we've talked about here today, a comparable body of evidence on why social emotional skills and life skills, are so critical, and how to help build that evidence, body of comparable evidence across programs to help governments, make very critical decisions that they have, trade-offs they have of, how to embed these skills among many other competing priorities they have in schools. And yet we know that, that they really do help, as we're seeing with the evidence, not only with academic performance and persistence in school, but also with mental health and other key, social and gender norms, and helping create a more even playing field and reducing barriers for girls. So all of this led to us wanting, as I think was, great and highlighted by this report, to the fact that we need to partner with government more, which is what these two critical, sort of collectives are all about in India and in East Africa, and creating contextualized assessments. They've both been creating, very contextualized open source assessments, and working with government to pilot and validate them, to build a stronger body of evidence of why these skills are so important and how they're helping. So we've sort of taken the approach, after many years of investing globally, that much of the most important work and some of the most interesting, I think, and innovative work happening right now is actually coming from very contextualized work in these social emotional and life skills hubs that are working in India and East Africa.
Thank you very much, Erin, and fascinating work. Not from a weird angle, as we learned, and also, for later, I'd be curious to see also if you see some skills when they are attributed to boys being interpreted differently than when they're attributed to girls. We're all familiar with the men are ambitious and women are aggressive. So I would love to hear also your gendered analysis on that. I'm going to now turn to Emma van der Molen, who is again at Porticus, and Porticus is a member also of the Life Skills Collaborative in India. So a coalition of 18 organizations, including several international foundations, as well as local nonprofits, research centers, and mission-driven private consultancies. So Emma, what strategies do you envision to further this cross-border partnerships and coordination on social and emotional learning? In other words, how do you orchestrate all of these partners, and how can you help increase the number of players to this party?
Yeah, thank you very much, Bethiel. And thank you so much for your invitation to Porticus to be part of this panel. And thanks to all the very interesting work that is being presented today. Let me first just say a word about Porticus and our overarching goal to create a philanthropic organization. Our overarching goal is to create a just and sustainable future where human dignity flourishes. And this inspires our work in education, and that we refer to internally as the Building Future Generation sector. Our main focus is on strengthening social emotional learning, especially for children in extreme adversity, and all our strategies strive for impact that contributes to systems change. For Porticus, this panel, and for the sector perhaps, comes very timely, as we have completed our work on a new strategy for our work in education earlier this year. And there's a lot of continuity in our commitment to whole child development for children in adversity, but we also want to look forward to understanding better in the coming years, specifically the role of social emotional learning, that social emotional learning plays for improving education for children who are displaced and children who are on the margins of education systems, who are at risk of dropping out. We are also shifting our focus in terms of where we work to more of a focus on specific countries in the global south than in total, and continuing our work at the global level as well. So I want to highlight a few principles and strategies in relation to your question that actually might not come as a surprise, since we collaborate with Kidnap Giving. So the points mentioned by Erin very much I recognize in our work as well. First of all, we will focus more and more on partnerships that are Southern-led, South-South partnerships. And our role as a foundation is we really want to use our convening power to enable more learning and exchange between these regional networks, but also towards the global level. And the two networks that Erin has talked about. Porticus has also been involved in them as a supporter from the beginning, and we've also seen interesting sort of cross-learning and exchange between these two networks, which I think is something we look forward to supporting more. As a second point, I want to highlight our commitment to meaningful participation. I think this has come up a lot in the sessions as well. How we understand it in relation to social-emotional learning is that we can foster better coordination by bringing different groups of stakeholders together. So indeed, I think Erin highlighted within these two collaboratives, they build contextualized tools and interventions for social-emotional learning that reflect local interpretations of these concepts. So they take into account community interpretations, the view and voices of parents, of teachers, and we really strongly believe that this collaborative and participatory approach ensures more relevance of these interventions and more sustainable impacts. And finally, as I think important in this space in particular, with a lot of foundations, well, on the panel, but also perhaps in the room, we are looking forward to working in coalition with others. We believe we can't solve this alone. We are already prioritizing initiatives that are co-created, co-funded. In fact, with the Lego Foundation, the Jacobs Foundation, we are a part of a coalition of donors that is funding Schools 2030. A very innovative global program that includes work around holistic assessments, with a lot of learning coming out of that. Final point is that under our new strategy, one of our new initiatives is that we're also scoping out a new knowledge center that will curate evidence and learning on social-emotional learning. We might have spoken to several, my colleagues might have already invited your insights of some of you online or on the panel even, to inform this and how it will shape up. And we are hoping that this will also be a strong initiative that will foster better coordination on social-emotional learning with relevance for the wider education sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma. And yes, very welcome news. Yes, we need more coordination, and as we will also discuss, the uptake by policymakers, especially in the South, is still not very high. So maybe being better coordinated would help in that sense. I'm going to now turn to you, Bo. So the Lego Foundation supports the development of social and emotional skills using an approach known as learning through play, in which children's holistic skills, including cell skills like critical thinking, empathy, self-esteem, are developed through joyful interactive experiences. So while the Lego Foundation is in transition, you still have a track record, very interesting, of programs in 18 countries across 4 continents. So could you tell us more about what the Lego Foundation has learned about learning through play and its impact on, fostering social and emotional skills?
Absolutely. And again, thank you so much to OECD for bringing forward such an impressive work with the data and analytics to help us work together to develop, to measure and improve social emotional skills. It was worth the wait, as I think you hinted towards in the beginning. So it's correct, we work across many different countries and contexts. We work from the most desperate and biggest global humanitarian crises to very solid, well-established educational systems. And we appreciate that many of the partners that we have funded over many years are illustrated in the report. And I think there's a growing excitement around the opportunities for children to develop and learn through play. The growing evidence over the past decade highlights many examples. But I think there are 3 things that are important in this context that we have learned. And I think the first one is a basic thing around play, because play enables children, in particular young people, to express their thoughts and feelings, to relate to stories in a safe environment, to create and imagine how things can be different, which means it's an obvious starting point for thinking about assessments also of social emotional skills, because play helps them articulate it. particularly in places and situations where it's very difficult for them to resonate with standardized or traditional forms of assessment. So play is basically a mechanism where we can address the individual needs and backgrounds of children who have very different starting points. So we address them in their own language, basically. The second thing we have learned is that when we think about different aspects of play, it's a very flexible and a very local approach, because it doesn't focus on one rigid outcome alone, but it's holistic. But it also comes through not only through one aspect of play, but through experiential learning. When children create their own projects, like physically tangible things they care for, or where they address problems that are central to their context and their identity, their community, like with community-based learning. So it actually starts with recognizing the context and the strengths of the community. So that's part of many of the international studies, that it starts with the students' interest, it starts with the context of families and caregivers and the capabilities of the practitioners. So I think this is where we can see that having the local context, the materials, familiarized environments is important about learning through play. And finally, it touches upon the things that were mentioned in the presentations here, that play addresses the skills that are absolutely essential for the labor market right now, but also what Erin mentioned, that SEL is a critical enabler of traditional literacies like language and mathematics and so forth. I don't think it can be said enough or emphasized enough that it supports a full breadth of skills which enable all the other literacies that other people call foundational, because you cannot learn if you are in an unhealthy situation of stress, if you are emotionally unbalanced, if you don't have any supportive context, don't have friends, don't have strong relationships. So we need to address this false dichotomy between the non-cognitive, soft, social emotional and more traditional outcomes. So we treat it as an integrated part of all our programs. And it's probably more important to think about how it's integrated with the pedagogies, the whole educators and resources to establish that positive, safe and stimulating environment. So for us, what we've learned, learning through play means that context matters, local context, individuals, and we actually have particular instruments now where assessments can be playful and still be rigid and reliable. But it's a particular skill set, both of the assessment teams, but also practitioners to use them.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much. Well, indeed, this also triggers questions, because it could appear as an approach that's suitable for northern-based countries, but in fact, you've been testing it in more environments than that. So I think that takes us a bit away from the traditional foundational versus cell, which is sometimes perceived as a northern-driven agenda. So it's nice to also have evidence to show that it's not. Actually, playing is pretty universal, if you ask me. So I'm going to turn now to Fabio. So Fabio Segura, co-CEO of the Jacobs Foundation. So Fabio, in 2023, the Jacobs Foundation teamed up with Fundación de Empresarios por la Educación, EGSE, in Colombia for a coalition on education with a focus on social and emotional learning. So this includes a program called Communities of Change, in which you work closely with local education authorities across the country. Again, another great example of how philanthropy doesn't work in silo, in isolation, but aligned and with an owned program by a government. So can you tell us how foundations effectively collaborate with governments and policymakers to integrate social and emotional learning into educational policies and systems? Because we've heard how difficult it is, because sometimes our timing is completely off, or government doesn't have the absorptive capacity, or they don't have the budget, or the government changes. So what's your magic trick? What's your secret for engaging so well with governments?
Yeah, well, we wish we had a magic wand here. Firstly, thanks again for having me here, and congratulations on behalf of the Jacobs Foundation for this amazing report, which we have read in awe of the insights that are bringing a new light to things that we're working with every day. But to come back to your question, Batil, there is a first, let's say, agreement one has to have with all stakeholders around the table if one is to work with government, and is that the ultimate end game is policy implementation. So improving policy implementation, and for us at Jacobs Foundation, that means that policies are based on evidence, that policies stand the rigor of data, and the policies stand and are based on solid research of what works in the context where they're based. And that basically forces both government and private actors to look at a number of things. For example, where policy fails, or where in the policymaking cycle there are opportunities for improvement of the actual implementation, and who are the key stakeholders that are better positioned to doing that. And as it was said before in this webinar, in our observations and in our experience, scalability, once you have stood the trial of efficacy, something that actually works, has less to do with whether a program is viable or not, in the sense that it yields the intended results, and it has more often to do with whether the enabling conditions are in place, and that has to do with transferability, implementability, and a culture of evidence from the part of the government as well as from the funders. So one of the things that we typically do is support the government in their capacity to assess these dimensions: efficacy, transferability, implementability, and then we accompany them, and we also go in tandem with local authorities into creating frameworks for evidence, but also for accountability, mutual accountability. When we create co-funding mechanisms, these act as a way of setting priorities together with the stakeholders that are less often represented in national policies, but that are critical in local implementation at the regional level. And then lastly, setting the frameworks for evaluating how to describe problems of policy, but also how to choose interventions that are more likely to address them. So those are some of the observations and lessons learned that we have had in the last few years in working with government, not only in Colombia, in Cote d'Ivoire, here in Switzerland, where you would think the level of working is less complex, and actually is very complex as well, given the level of decentralization and the complexity of the multicultural, multi-nation context that we have. So back over to you, Batil.
Thanks, Fabio. And yes, we've seen live the working with the Ivorian government, and actually having a physical presence made a big difference, which we can park that question for later, but I would love to hear also, for those who don't have presence on the ground, how are the proxies of your partners sufficient to understand the political economy? Anyways, I'm going to stay with you, Fabio, and ask you a follow-up question. So this initiative also includes a co-funding mechanism, so which makes use of innovative finance mechanism. So what does it have to do? Why would you use such a seemingly complicated funding model, and why is it, do you think it's suitable for social and emotional learning interventions?
Well, this is very simple, and in its complexity, it has a very simple logic. The first one, it is to increase capital, because it is obvious to us that the means are growing slower than the needs when it comes to funding social emotional learning and quality education in general. So increasing capital is an objective of the Jacobs Foundation wherever we work systematically. The second objective to this is increasing efficiency. Many of our partners in the philanthropic space like to have a direct line of communication with governments or with authorities, and they like to have their own agendas, whether it's a flavor of an intervention, whether it is a region, whether it is a particular solution that they're promoting. And this makes governments very inefficient in terms of coordinating all of these demands and responding to them with policy priorities. So having a co-funding mechanism with its own governance is also a way of improving efficiency. So this is ultimately increasing capital adequacy. And this is, resulting in at least three things. The first one is more capital to choose the best interventions that are more adequate to the regions or to the context where they are needed. But the second one is to keep mutual accountability, because everybody has to give a certain amount of say in how programs ultimately are designed and deployed, including us who are promoting the design of these co-funding mechanisms. We take a seat at a steering committee, which is presided and led by the government, which is what makes this sustainable and aligned with policy ultimately.
Thank you very much, Fabio, keeping each other accountable. I will now turn back to Erin, also prompting you to share what you've learned, because we love to talk about collaboratives, we love to talk about partnerships. We could talk about it until the year 3000, but the ones who've actually done it probably have some more insights. So rather than speaking theoretically, dear Erin, you've worked with other foundations and as part of collaboratives relative to social and emotional learning. So what are your takeaways on this? Is it one of these areas where collaboratives are sometimes the result of fads? So what's your take on these types of collaboratives?
Thanks, Fathiel. I will say that we've really been impressed in the past few years. They're about 3-4 years old. COVID time obviously creates a little bit of challenge with some of the timelines of these collaboratives, but they've really been working very hard in recent times. I think achieved quite a lot in terms of their partnerships with governments and the evidence that they've started to build. And so it's been some of the most dynamic and interesting work that we've been a part of. And we ourselves, having worked with both the India Life Skills Collaborative and the Alive Collaborative in East Africa, have been interrogating why are they going so well? What is really happening? And I think around a few things we've noticed. First, we've been very inclusive, from the beginning, of a kind of variety of actors around the table needed, as everyone is saying. It's really been driven by some of the key implementing organizations that have been working in these regions, on the skills issues for some time, but we've been able to bring in donors and kind of the key funders in those areas and align ourselves together. Also having a strong backbone agency that's done a lot of the project management to take the load off of some of the others and kind of create some equal playing field for everyone, and then really inviting government in. And it's taken a lot of time to build trust, to work on those relationships, but kind of being really inclusive of everyone around the table has been key. And then spending time aligning around principles took us, quite frankly, the better part of the first year of these collectives was really working to understand what were we trying to do together. What do we mean by open source, contextualized assessment tools? Why we were focused on really, kind of working with the government on the government education sector, that we weren't working on implementation, that this was really about assessment and advocacy efforts, and, just really kind of understanding what that meant. And then I would say we did a good job, or at least a fairly decent job, of trying to be more practitioner led and less donor, funder led, really putting, the work, supporting the work of the key organizations that have been in this field, and not being overly directive, but really taking a back seat and letting them define what was the best way to work together, and kind of being, very much in the driver's seat. I can't stress enough that really from a funder perspective, the way we can be supportive is also to fund these backbone agencies that have helped to hold the program management responsibilities, because there's a lot of work in these collectives, and you can't be expecting the same people that are kind of sitting around the table to be doing all of the detailed work sometimes in managing collectives. And so providing enough funds to create a place to hold all that work, I think has been important. And then I would say kind of the biggest lesson is that, what we're trying to do is ensure that, the work together adds up to more than what any single organization could accomplish. And so it's really been incredibly important for us to understand what is most valuable that a collective does, which is different than what, individual funding agencies' agenda might be, or an individual organization might be. And so some things are better done in a collective, and kind of identifying what those things are. We do think some of this comparable evidence, some of these advocacy efforts, things like that are much better, done and more powerful as a collective. And so really kind of defining what that impact looks like from the collective, because you're going to need to make pivots and changes, based on the external environment, based on how government kind of what they want, what their agenda is, how to align with that. when other, issues come up in country. COVID was just one of them when schools shut, but an interesting opportunity is it really provided a window in which governments were much more receptive to some of these ideas around social emotional learning and working together with them on this idea of how students need to really be adaptable, flexible, and thrive in crisis. That provided a window for us as well, right? So I think being able to be nimble and work together as a collective was critical in these moments. So those are some of the things that we've learned that really have helped to, I think, develop and maintain these collectives, kind of momentum in the effort.
Thank you so much, Erin. It sounds both fascinating and a lot of work. I'm going to turn back to you, Emma. And given your focus at Porticus on whole child development, how do you envision integrating, these dimensions of social and emotional learning into formal education systems? So are there strategic, are there partnerships that you think should be pursued in that direction? How do you basically take from, your theory of change and what you've invested research in into working with government into the policy space?
Yeah, thanks a lot, Batil, for the question. I'll highlight a few elements of sort of how we work that relate to this point. The first one to really stress that for us, how to integrate social emotional learning is not an afterthought, but it's really an important part of our initial vision and design. So staying with the example of the Life Skills Collaborative, in that case, I think it's important to also reimagine the role of the state education as engage stakeholders in the process rather than presenting them with a finished project. So in the case of the Life Skills Collaborative, they could provide input to help shape the tools from the start and ensure they were effective by piloting them in public schools. Also, I think it was mentioned already or questioned by you, but we do have local presence in all of our focus countries, which I think helps our programming to be informed by very strong contextual understanding of the political and social developments, and also spot opportunities in terms of policy reforms. And then I'll very quickly highlight, because I'm aware of the time, that under our new education strategy, we will work in 3 broad areas related to this integration into formal systems. One is on shifting mindsets, building on the work that we've done together with the Jacobs Foundation and Lego Foundation on challenging this false dichotomy that was already mentioned by my colleague from Lego, that we've put together. We've challenged in a recent evidence synthesis that we published earlier this year, and we really want to build on that, really emphasize the point that social emotional learning is not a separate subject, but an approach to education that integrates learning so that students are able to be successful. And we really want to highlight the interrelationship and the interconnectedness between academic, social, emotional, and cognitive development, and indeed build a movement or work together with others to improve understanding of this area. A second area of work relates to changing power dynamics, so working for better representation of specific marginalized groups in education decision-making, education policy-making, so that it better reflects the identity and vision of marginalized groups, where specifically in several countries where we work, who are typically more excluded from these processes. And finally, under tools and approaches, we support a variety of interventions, such as the development of teaching and learning materials, teacher professional development related to social emotional learning, and of course, a big focus of Porticus has been on the assessment tool development work. We just look forward to building on that under our new strategy, and to working with others in these 3 areas of shifting mindsets, changing power dynamics, and building relevant tools and approaches for the sector, with the ultimate goal of integration into and influencing national education systems.
Thank you so much, Emma. In the interest of time, we're going to finish up with you, Bo, but it's, as we say, last but not least, we're circling back to assessments. So in the Lego Foundation's contribution to the OECD report on philanthropy for social and emotional learning, your CEO Sitzel Mary Christensen, highlighted that it is best to start with existing measurement tools rather than reinventing the wheel for each new program. So with programs in such diverse environments and communities across the globe, how does the LEGO Foundation ensure that these interventions and also the way they are assessed are actually relevant and culturally sensitive? So over to you both.
Thank you so much. And I'll be very brief, given the time here. But, over the years, it's been very clear that we are much more in need for being culturally sensitive towards, compared to our traditional ways to philanthropy, driving interventions and outcomes. But we believe that you can still be very culturally sensitive by focusing on local materials, activities, stories, imagery that cater to individual children experiences. But you need to drive that based on existing tools that have been tested, that borrow items from each other and so forth, instead of reinventing the wheel. And the main reason is that, I think was also mentioned here, as a philanthropic community, we need to find better ways to work together, to work with governments, to work with local communities, and that requires shared language, the constructs and taxonomies and so forth. I think Nelson mentions that no two foundations are using the same framework. So at a higher level, if we're able to have the same constructs and taxonomies, we can still operationalize that, learn and build on existing tools to make that contextually relevant. I think about it as a Lego brick, as a Lego system. There's a still very standardized, high quality system globally, but you can still use it very locally to create your own stories, or create your own identity through a similar process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for being concise. We cannot stop here, so it will have to be to be continued. But let me finish by thanking our panelists and Professor Roberts. It's been an amazing discussion. We hope you walk away with a better understanding of why social and emotional learning is important, why developing these skills and measuring them is indeed difficult, and why we need to invest more in understanding how to improve them and how to improve their uptake in education policy. For education funders, the NetForward will meet on the 20th of November in Paris for our education working group, Education in Crisis. We will look at disruptions like COVID, the need to digitalize, climate change, but also conflict settings. So please contact us if you'd like more information. And I cannot end without thanking Nelson, Madeleine, but also Sonia and Sabrina, and of course, Noemi's team and the Education Directorate here at the OECD. This would not have been possible without you. So again, a big thank you. And this is a to be continued. You can, again, look at the reports, flash the QR codes, and disseminate, comment, give us feedback, because this is just the beginning. And we were, again, delighted to have this this starting conversation with this this group of peers and experts that are so dedicated to promoting, assessing, and pushing social and emotional learning and skills for the future. Thank you very much, and have a good day, afternoon, evening, and to be continued.